They made a critical mistake when they decided to mess with me. I'm about to tell you the story of how a group of HOA officials turned my peaceful life into a living hell, and how I transformed that hell into a money-printing machine that would make them regret ever crossing a Texas rancher. That's right. They built a fence blocking the only road to my ranch. But apparently they never heard the saying, never anger a Texas rancher with DIY skills and too much free time. Today I'm sitting here counting the money from my homemade toll booth while the HOA president is explaining to his superiors why their budget suddenly vanished and their development deal fell through spectacularly. Where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below if you've ever had a pleasant experience with an HOA. I guarantee your stories can't be crazier than what I'm about to share with you on HOA Unleashed, where we expose the truth about homeowner association tyranny and the people who fight back. I'm Ethan Morgan, a 38-year-old who works remotely in business consulting, but has been passionate about electronics and DIY projects since childhood. 2 years ago, I purchased a 30-acre ranch outside Austin, Texas, to pursue my dream of self-sufficient living away from corporate politics and city stress. The property wasn't much to look at when I bought it. Overgrown fields stretched in every direction. A weathered farmhouse that had clearly seen better days sat in the middle of it all, and a ramshackle barn that looked like it might collapse in the next strong Texas wind. But I saw incredible potential where others saw problems and headaches. The land was fertile with rich soil that hadn't been overfarmed. The water rights were solid and legally protected. And most importantly, it was far enough from the city to give me the peace and quiet I craved, but close enough that I could still get supplies and maintain my consulting business when needed. I'd always been fascinated with technology and creating things with my hands since I was old enough to hold a screwdriver. Since middle school, I'd been taking apart electronics and putting them back together, usually with improvements that sometimes worked brilliantly and sometimes resulted in small controlled fires that my parents weren't too thrilled about discovering. Over time, I taught myself programming, electronics, and automation systems, which came in incredibly handy for modernizing various systems around my property and making ranch life more efficient and enjoyable. My first major project was designing and installing an automated irrigation system that used advanced soil moisture sensors and real-time weather data to optimize watering schedules for my expanding vegetable garden. It saved tremendous amounts of water while producing an impressive harvest that first summer that surprised even me. Next came the solar-powered chicken coop with automated doors that opened at sunrise and closed at sunset to protect my growing flock from predators and harsh weather. The system even sent me text alerts if anything unusual happened during the night. I even rigged up a sophisticated monitoring system that could predict when one of my goats was about to give birth by analyzing their movement patterns and behavior through sensors and cameras. The technology allowed me to be present for births and ensure healthy deliveries. My ranch quickly became my sanctuary and creative playground, where I grew organic vegetables, raised chickens and goats, and designed innovative technological solutions for efficient farm living. Most weekends, local families would visit to buy fresh eggs and produce, and I occasionally rented out sections of the property for small events, camping trips, and agricultural education workshops. The road leading to my property had existed for over 50 years and passed through a small area managed by the Golden Meadows Homeowners Association. The neighborhood was about half a mile from my property, a collection of upper-middle-class homes with perfectly manicured lawns, coordinated mailboxes, and residents who took their property values very seriously. Although I wasn't a member of the HOA and had no desire to be, I had a recorded easement agreement from the previous property owner that legally guaranteed my permanent right to use this road for access. The document was crystal clear and had been properly filed with the county. I had the permanent, irrevocable right to access my property via this route, regardless of who owned or managed the surrounding land or how they felt about my presence. This arrangement had worked perfectly for the past 2 years without a single problem. I maintained friendly relationships with most of my neighbors, particularly Frank and Eleanor Hamilton, an elderly couple who had lived next door for 30 years and regularly purchased eggs and vegetables from my farm. Frank was a retired electrical engineer who often helped me troubleshoot my more ambitious automation projects, offering decades of professional experience and practical wisdom. Eleanor would bring over her famous blueberry pies in exchange for fresh eggs and garden vegetables. We had developed a wonderful system of mutual support and friendship. Life was peaceful, productive, and exactly what I had hoped for when I left the corporate world behind. Until that certified letter arrived in my mailbox one Tuesday afternoon that would change everything. I remember it clearly because I had just finished installing a new automated feeding system for my goats and was covered in hay and grease when I decided to check the mail before cleaning up. The official-looking envelope stood out among the usual bills and agricultural supply catalogs like a red flag. Inside was a formal notice about an urgent HOA meeting at the Golden Meadows Community Center. What immediately caught my attention was a vague but ominous reference to illegal road usage issues and security enhancement proposals that would be discussed and voted on at the upcoming meeting. I was confused and concerned since I wasn't an HOA member and had clear legal rights to use the road that had never been questioned before. The letter seemed deliberately ambiguous, filled with corporate jargon that obscured rather than clarified its actual purpose and intent. After reading it several times and trying to decipher the bureaucratic language, I decided to attend the meeting to clarify any misunderstandings and ensure my rights were protected. Little did I know that this HOA meeting would be the beginning of a 6-month battle that would test everything I thought I knew about property rights, community relationships, and the lengths some people will go to for money and power. The day of the meeting arrived with an unusual spring thunderstorm that seemed to mirror my growing unease about the situation. Rain pounded on my truck as I drove the familiar route to the Golden Meadows Community Center. And the irony wasn't lost on me that my right to drive this very road was apparently up for debate by people who had no legal authority over it. I parked my muddy pickup truck between two spotless luxury SUVs, already feeling out of place in this immaculate suburban environment. My work boots left wet tracks on the polished floor as I entered the community center, earning disapproving glances from several well-dressed residents who clearly viewed me as some kind of unwelcome intruder. On Thursday evening, I walked into the community center where about 30 residents were already seated in neat rows of folding chairs, all facing forward like students in a classroom. I recognized some familiar faces, including Frank Hamilton, who gave me a concerned nod from across the room that suggested he knew something I didn't. At the front of the room stood a tall man in an expensive suit whom I'd never seen before in my 2 years of living in the area. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled like a politician's, and his leather shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights with the kind of shine that suggested they cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. He had the practiced smile of a politician or a car salesman, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes and seems designed to project confidence while concealing true intentions. He introduced himself as Maxwell Bennett, the new HOA president who had recently relocated from a successful real estate development career in Dallas. He added with obvious pride and self-importance. Beside him stood Patricia Lawson, the HOA manager, whose perpetual scowl seemed permanently etched onto her face like it had been carved there by years of bureaucratic authority and petty power. She clutched a tablet to her chest like it contained state secrets and eyed me with immediate suspicion, as if I were a known troublemaker who had wandered into their pristine community. Maxwell kicked off the meeting by discussing various mundane community matters: landscaping contracts that needed approval, the upcoming community pool renovation that would cost thousands of dollars, and the annual summer barbecue that required extensive planning and coordination. He then eventually transitioned to what he casually called the Ranch Road situation, as if it were just another minor item on the agenda, rather than something that could dramatically impact my life and livelihood. The casual way he dismissed my concerns and property rights made my blood pressure rise significantly. I noticed Frank shifting uncomfortably in his seat, suggesting he knew what was coming and wasn't happy about it. "As many of you know," Maxwell said with practiced authority, adjusting his expensive-looking tie, "we have exciting plans to develop Golden Meadows Estates on the prime land adjacent to our beautiful community. This premium housing development will significantly increase all of our property values by at least 30%, bringing substantial financial benefits to every homeowner here." He clicked a remote control device and a sleek digital presentation appeared on the wall, showing professional architectural renderings of luxurious homes with swimming pools, perfectly landscaped gardens, and amenities that screamed wealth and exclusivity. Phase 1 will include 12 executive homes starting at $1, $2 million each, complete with a private clubhouse and tennis courts exclusively for Golden Meadows residents. He continued as appreciative murmurs rippled through the audience of homeowners who were clearly excited about their potential windfall. However, Maxwell's tone shifted slightly. We face one significant obstacle to this development: the unsightly ranch operation that creates unwanted traffic through our beautiful community. My blood began to boil as I realized he was talking about my property and my legitimate use of the access road. The way he said ranch made it sound like a toxic waste dump rather than a productive agricultural operation that contributed to the local economy and provided fresh food to the community. Maxwell continued his presentation, displaying architectural renderings of a massive security gate and fence system designed to beautify the entrance and control undesirable traffic. A thinly veiled reference to me and my visitors who came to buy produce and participate in educational activities. The security gate will feature elegant stone columns, professional landscaping, and a state-of-the-art access control system that will enhance both security and property values throughout our community, he explained, clicking through more polished images that look like something from a luxury resort brochure. Construction is scheduled to begin tomorrow morning and should be completed within 3 business days, he announced, as if the matter had already been decided without any input from affected parties. I couldn't stay silent any longer. My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I stood up, drawing all eyes in the room to focus on me with curiosity and suspicion. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my rising anger and disbelief. "I'm Ethan Morgan, the owner of that unsightly ranch you just mentioned. I have a legal easement that's been recorded with the county for over 50 years, granting me permanent access to my property via that road. You can't just block a legally established right-of-way without any notice, discussion, or due process." The room fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Maxwell's expression changed from surprise to barely concealed disdain in an instant. He clearly hadn't expected me to be present at the meeting or to speak up and challenge his authority so directly and publicly. He recovered quickly, though, forcing a condescending smile that made me want to knock his perfect teeth out of his arrogant face. "Mr. Morgan," he said with an air of superior authority that suggested the matter was already settled, "while you may have had some informal arrangement in the past with previous property owners, the HOA has full legal authority over community roads and security measures within our jurisdiction. Besides," he continued with obvious disdain, "your farm operation is frankly an eyesore that's depressing property values throughout our community. The board has already approved the security gate project unanimously after careful consideration." He gestured toward a group of nodding men and women in the front row, who I assumed were board members, all of whom seemed to be in complete agreement with his assessment of my property and rights. "Of course, we're not unreasonable people," Maxwell added with false magnanimity. "You'll be able to purchase an access card for a very reasonable annual fee of just $3,000. That's quite generous considering the increased property values and enhanced security we're providing to the entire area." I felt my face growing hot with anger and frustration. "This isn't some informal arrangement," I said firmly, looking around the room and making eye contact with several residents. "It's a recorded easement that's been properly filed with the county clerk's office. That's a legal right that you simply can't vote away or charge fees for accessing. And furthermore," I continued, "my farm has been operating on that land for decades, long before most of your houses were even built. The previous owners never had any issues with the community, and neither did I until you decided to manufacture this conflict for your development project." Maxwell's practiced smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened with cold calculation. "Well, times change, Mr. Morgan," he said dismissively. "Progress waits for no one. The board has made its decision based on what's best for the entire community. Construction starts first thing tomorrow morning. I strongly suggest you apply for your access card promptly to avoid any inconvenience or complications," he added with a tone that was clearly intended as a threat rather than helpful advice. With that calculated dismissal, he smoothly moved on to the next agenda item as if the matter of my property rights was completely settled and not worth further discussion or consideration. After the meeting concluded, I stood in the parking lot, still seething with anger and disbelief at what I had just witnessed. The rain had stopped, but water continued dripping from the trees overhead, matching my increasingly dark mood about the situation. George Miller, a longtime Golden Meadows resident I recognized from previous community events, approached me cautiously in the parking lot. He was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a perpetual worry line etched into his forehead from years of observing neighborhood politics. Looking around nervously to ensure no one was watching or listening to our conversation, he shared something deeply disturbing about Maxwell's true motivations and methods. Bennett promised his investors he'd increase property values by upgrading the area and eliminating what he calls undesirable elements, George whispered, meaning your ranch and your legal right to access it. He needs your land for the full development project to be profitable. This gate situation is just the first step in a calculated campaign to pressure you into selling at whatever price he dictates. George's voice dropped to barely audible levels. He's done this exact same thing before in other communities around Dallas. First comes the access restrictions and harassment, then mysterious code violations appear out of nowhere, then water access problems develop, then septic issues arise. He'll systematically make your life absolutely miserable until you give up fighting and sell your property for whatever he's willing to offer. I thank George for sharing this crucial information, feeling a growing sense of dread about what I might be facing in the coming weeks and months. When I asked Maxwell directly about seeing documentation of my easement rights, he claimed they were under review and temporarily unavailable for inspection. Our legal team is looking into the validity of old easements in light of our new security requirements and community standards, he said dismissively. I'm sure we'll sort it all out eventually through proper legal channels. The implication was crystal clear. He was buying time while moving forward aggressively with his plans, hoping to create facts on the ground before I could mount any effective legal resistance. As I drove home that night through the darkness, my truck's headlights cutting through the gloom, I couldn't shake the growing feeling that I was about to be systematically railroaded by people with more money, political connections, and legal resources than I could possibly match on my own. That night, I called my friend Olivia Newton, a local real estate attorney I had known since our college days who specialized in property rights and land use disputes. Despite the late hour, she picked up on the third ring, immediately sensing the urgency in my voice. I explained the entire situation while pacing back and forth in my kitchen, occasionally stopping to peer out the window as if expecting to see bulldozers already heading toward my property under cover of darkness. Olivia listened carefully to every detail, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the timeline, the legal documents involved, and the specific threats that had been made. When I finished my account, she let out a low whistle of concern. Ethan, these HOA types can be absolutely ruthless when money and development projects are involved, she explained, the sound of keyboard clicking in the background, suggesting she was already researching similar cases and legal precedents. But they can't simply ignore or vote away a properly recorded easement. That's not how property law works in Texas or anywhere else in the United States, she continued with professional confidence. First thing tomorrow morning, go directly to the county registry office and obtain a certified copy of your easement document. If it's properly recorded and legally valid, they cannot legally block your access, period. However, fighting this could take months of litigation and cost thousands of dollars in legal fees that you'll have to pay up front. Her words weren't exactly comforting, but at least they gave me a clear direction and some hope that the law was actually on my side in this dispute. What about tomorrow? I asked, anxiety clearly audible in my voice. They're planning to start construction first thing in the morning. Can we get an emergency injunction or some kind of court order to stop them? Olivia sighed heavily. Emergency injunctions take time to obtain, even in clear-cut cases like this. We're talking about at least several days, maybe weeks, depending on the court calendar and how backed up the judges are with other cases. For now, document absolutely everything, she advised. Take photographs of the current situation. Record any interactions you have with HOA officials. Keep copies of all communications, emails, letters, and meeting minutes. If they actually block your access completely, call the sheriff's department immediately and reference your easement rights. That could potentially be considered unlawful imprisonment on your own property. We talked for another half hour, outlining a comprehensive legal strategy and discussing potential outcomes. By the time we hung up, it was well past midnight, and I was exhausted but at least felt like I had a plan of action. Before going to bed, I grabbed a flashlight and walked down my long driveway to examine the main road area where the construction was supposed to begin. Sure enough, there were fresh survey marks and wooden stakes along the roadside, with bright orange flags and spray-painted lines clearly marking where the fence and gate would be installed. They had obviously been planning this confrontation for weeks or even months, waiting for the right moment to spring their trap and present me with a fait accompli that would be difficult to reverse through legal channels. I had a restless night of sleep, tossing and turning while thinking about legal strategies and potential solutions. I had naively assumed I would have at least a few days to consult with attorneys and work through the proper legal channels to resolve the dispute. But when I woke up the next morning to the distinctive sound of heavy construction machinery operating right outside my property, I realized the situation had escalated dramatically overnight, and my peaceful ranch life was about to become a war zone. The characteristic beep, beep, beep sound of construction vehicles backing up and maneuvering dragged me from sleep just after dawn. I threw on clothes as quickly as possible and rushed outside, still pulling on my boots as I ran down the driveway toward the road. From my front porch, I watched in complete disbelief as a professional construction crew systematically erected an 8-foot-tall metal fence and installed a sophisticated electronic gate directly across my access road, effectively cutting off my property from the outside world like a medieval siege. The fence extended in both directions from the central gate, creating an impenetrable barrier that would prevent any vehicle from reaching my ranch. A large yellow excavator was efficiently digging deep post holes, while other workers mixed and poured concrete for the gate foundations with military precision. I rushed over to the construction site, demanding to speak with whoever was in charge of this operation, but the workers simply said they were following their orders and couldn't stop the project for any reason. "We're just doing what we're paid to do, sir," said a worker in a hard hat, not meeting my eyes and clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "You'll have to talk to the HOA management if you have any concerns or complaints about the work we're doing." Within an hour of my discovery, Maxwell arrived on the scene with Patricia in tow, both of them dressed immaculately despite the early hour and dusty construction site environment. Maxwell smugly waved what he claimed was a valid building permit, though he was careful not to let me examine it closely or verify its authenticity. "This is HOA property, Mr. Morgan," he announced with barely concealed satisfaction and triumph. "You'll need to register for an access card, $3,000 annually, to use our private road system. Patricia can process your application right now," he continued with false helpfulness, "though approval typically takes 5 to 7 business days for security clearance and background checks." He flashed that insincere smile again that was becoming increasingly irritating. "Until then, I've personally authorized a temporary access card for you. We're not monsters after all. We understand you need to get to your property." I was absolutely livid, my hands clenching into fists at my sides as I struggled to maintain control. "This is completely illegal," I said through gritted teeth. "I have a recorded easement that guarantees my access rights, and you know it perfectly well. You cannot block the only access to my property without due process." Maxwell's smile never faltered, but his eyes grew cold and calculating. "Mr. Morgan, I understand you're upset about this change, but I'd strongly advise against interfering with a legally authorized construction project. We have all the necessary permits and approvals, and I'd hate to have to call the police if you become disruptive or violent." He placed a patronizing hand on Patricia's shoulder. "Miss Lawson, please provide Mr. Morgan with his temporary access card so he can continue his daily activities without interruption." "I have other important appointments to attend to," he added dismissively, turning and walking back to his luxury SUV as if the matter was completely settled. Patricia handed me a cheap plastic card with obvious reluctance, as if she were giving away her personal fortune to an undeserving beggar. "This temporary card expires in exactly 7 days," she said curtly, her tone making it clear she expected me to cause trouble and was almost hoping for an excuse to call security. "The annual fee must be paid in full before we can issue a permanent access card. There are absolutely no monthly payment options or financial assistance programs available." Left with no immediate legal options and needing to get to town for supplies and to consult with my attorney, I reluctantly took the card and retreated to my truck, feeling humiliated and powerless. The gate was already fully operational, requiring me to swipe the card like some kind of hotel guest just to exit my own property. The humiliation and rage I felt in that moment was overwhelming and unlike anything I had experienced in my adult life. I drove straight to the county registry office, a 30-minute trip to the courthouse downtown, my mind racing with legal strategies and potential solutions. The registrar, an older woman with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, helped me locate and obtain a certified copy of my easement document. She raised her eyebrows significantly as she reviewed the legal language. "This is a pretty straightforward perpetual access easement," she commented professionally. "Been legally in place since 1972. Very strange that anyone would dispute something this clear-cut and well-documented." I clutched the official document like a lifeline, feeling slightly vindicated but still uncertain about my next steps and how long it might take to resolve this through proper legal channels. From the county office, I headed straight to Olivia's law firm, which occupied half a floor in a modest office building on the edge of downtown Austin. Her assistant immediately showed me into her office, where Olivia was already surrounded by open law books and her computer displayed multiple tabs of legal research related to easement rights. After carefully reviewing my documents and examining the certified easement, she confirmed that my rights were absolutely valid and legally binding. "They cannot legally block your access under any circumstances," she stated firmly, removing her reading glasses for emphasis. "This easement is crystal clear and has been properly recorded with the county for decades. It runs with the land, which means it transfers automatically with property ownership and isn't affected by who currently owns or manages either property." She leaned forward across her desk, her expression serious and concerned. "But getting an emergency injunction could still take several weeks, and they obviously know that. This is a deliberate delay tactic designed to pressure you into accepting their terms before the legal system can properly function." Olivia explained that we could file for an emergency injunction to force immediate removal of the gate, but the courts were significantly backlogged and it would likely be at least 3 weeks before we could get a hearing date. "Meanwhile, document absolutely everything," she advised once again. "Take photographs from multiple angles. Record conversations if it's legal to do so. Keep a detailed written journal of every interaction and incident. If they completely block your access, even temporarily, call the sheriff's department immediately and specifically reference your recorded easement rights." I left Olivia's office with a clear legal strategy, but feeling like I was already several moves behind in a chess game I hadn't even realized I was playing until it was almost too late. When I returned to my property that afternoon, the fence and electronic gate were completely finished and operational. The once open access road now featured an imposing metal barrier with keycard access, security cameras, and intercoms that made it look like a high-security government facility. The fence extended as far as I could see in both directions, creating a physical manifestation of Maxwell's determination to control my movements and pressure me into submission or sale. Maxwell was waiting there with his characteristic condescending smile, personally handing me a temporary 7-day access card like he was doing me some enormous favor. "After that expires," he said with obvious satisfaction, "you'll need to pay the annual fee or find another way to reach your property. I'm sure a resourceful person like you will figure something out." Then he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I know you've been digging into the legal paperwork and consulting with attorneys. Go ahead and file for your injunction. By the time it goes through the court system, our development deal will be completely secured and we'll have other creative ways to make your life uncomfortable if you continue to be unreasonable." As I watched his smug, self-satisfied expression, a sudden idea flashed through my mind like a bolt of lightning. If they wanted to turn my access road into a toll booth operation, why couldn't I do exactly the same thing to them? I didn't reveal my thoughts to Maxwell or give any indication of what I was planning. Instead, I took the temporary access card silently and drove through their gate onto my property, already beginning to formulate a plan that would turn their own tactics against them. Once safely inside my property boundaries, I parked my truck and walked the entire perimeter of my land, paying particular attention to where their new fence intersected with my property line and examining the survey markers that had been placed years earlier. Something didn't seem quite right about the placement of their gate and fence system. The barrier appeared to curve slightly at one critical point, deviating from what I remembered as the actual property line based on my survey documents. I pulled out my detailed property survey from when I had purchased the ranch and studied it carefully, comparing landmarks, measurements, and boundary markers with what I was seeing in the field. After an hour of careful investigation and measurement, I developed a strong suspicion that needed to be confirmed. The HOA's new gate might actually be partially constructed on my property rather than entirely on theirs. For the next several days, I immersed myself completely in research on Texas property law, easement rights, and boundary disputes. I barely slept, spending countless hours at my kitchen table surrounded by legal documents, land surveys, property maps, and printouts of relevant Texas statutes. During this intensive research period, I discovered something absolutely fascinating that could change everything. My easement not only guaranteed me reasonable access to my property, but more importantly, I found through careful examination of both old and new property surveys that the HOA's gate actually encroached significantly onto my land. A surveying error on their part, or perhaps deliberate placement hoping I wouldn't notice, meant that about 3 feet of the electronic gate mechanism and one of the main fence posts were technically located on my property rather than theirs. This small but crucial detail could completely change the legal dynamics of our dispute and give me leverage I hadn't expected to have. I immediately consulted with Olivia about my findings, and she confirmed that if their gate was indeed partially on my land, I had certain property rights that they couldn't easily dismiss or ignore. If their gate system is encroaching on your property, they've essentially constructed an unauthorized structure on your land without permission, she explained, her voice conveying excitement and satisfaction. That gives you specific legal rights that they cannot simply vote away or charge fees to access. She strongly recommended getting an official professional survey to confirm my findings before taking any action. If you're correct about this boundary issue, it could be the leverage we need to resolve this entire situation quickly, she said. But we need to be absolutely certain before making any claims or taking any actions based on this theory. I called my friend Ryan Cooper, a local building contractor who had helped me renovate my barn the previous year and install several of my automation systems. Ryan was a practical, no-nonsense type who harbored a deep distrust of people in suits telling regular folks what they could do with their own property. I showed him my boundary maps, property survey, and my analysis of where the gate had been placed. After examining the documents carefully and walking the disputed property line with me using professional surveying equipment, he confirmed my findings beyond any doubt. "No question about it," he said, chewing on a toothpick and shaking his head at their audacity. "They built part of that expensive gate system directly on your land. Probably figured you wouldn't notice the encroachment or wouldn't know what to do about it if you did discover it." Ryan helped me formulate a plan to construct my own toll booth system right next to the HOA gate, positioned entirely on the section of land that was legally and unquestionably mine. With my extensive background in electronics, programming, and DIY construction projects, I could design and build a fully automated toll collection system for my portion of the road. "We'll need to move fast on this project," Ryan advised, understanding the urgency of the situation. "Once they realize what we're planning and building, they'll try everything possible to stop us through legal challenges or direct interference. Better to ask forgiveness than permission in this particular case." Ryan and I spent the entire weekend planning our construction project and gathering all the materials we would need. Knowing we had to act quickly while the HOA office was closed and Maxwell was presumably occupied with other matters, we made multiple trips to hardware stores, electronic suppliers, and lumber yards throughout the Austin area, gathering everything we would need for a professional quality toll booth that would be both functional and impossible to ignore. "Maxwell thinks he's won this battle," I told Ryan as we finalized our construction blueprints and material lists. "But this weekend, he's going to learn why you should never underestimate a Texas rancher with advanced DIY skills and a serious score to settle." Saturday evening, we began construction of what would become the most satisfying project of my entire life. Ryan brought 2 of his most trusted and skilled workers, and I called in a favor from my friend Marcus, who specialized in electrical work and automation systems. We worked efficiently under bright floodlights, the sounds of power tools occasionally drawing curious glances from passing cars. But fortunately, Maxwell and Patricia didn't make an appearance. Perhaps they thought their victory was already completely secured, and there was no need to monitor my activities. Ryan and I worked steadily through Saturday night and into Sunday morning, constructing a professional-looking toll booth strategically positioned adjacent to the HOA gate, but firmly and unquestionably on my property, according to all surveys and legal documents. We built a small but extremely sturdy structure with a covered operator area, an automated lifting arm barrier, and crystal clear signage that would be impossible to miss or misunderstand. I designed and installed all the electronic systems myself, including high-definition security cameras, a digital payment terminal that could accept cash and credit cards, and an automated barrier arm that I programmed to lift smoothly after payment was received and verified. We installed professional-looking signs reading "Private Toll Road, $20 per crossing," and "Monthly passes available, $100" that were printed at a local print shop. The owner had rushed the order as a personal favor after I shared my story. He had his own HOA horror stories and was absolutely delighted to help stick it to another tyrannical homeowner association. By early Sunday morning, we had a fully functional, completely legal toll booth operation with official-looking receipts, a mobile payment system that could process credit cards, and professional signage that made it clear this was a legitimate business operation. We even added solar panels and a battery backup system to ensure the booth couldn't be disabled by cutting electrical power, and motion-activated security cameras that would document any attempts at vandalism or interference. As Golden Meadows residents began returning from their weekend trips and family visits, they encountered our new toll booth with confusion, disbelief, and growing frustration as traffic began backing up. I stood at my booth wearing a clean button-down shirt and a professional-looking cap, politely explaining the situation to each confused and increasingly angry driver who approached my station. "The road crosses my private property at this exact point," I explained calmly to a bewildered family in an expensive minivan. "Since the HOA has decided to charge fees for crossing their property, I'm simply exercising the same right for the portion of the road that runs across my land. It's $20 per crossing or $100 for a monthly unlimited pass. I accept cash, credit cards, or mobile payments for your convenience." Some residents were initially angry and threatened to call police or the HOA. Others found the situation amusing and took pictures, but most ultimately paid the toll because they needed to get home to their families and didn't want to spend their Sunday dealing with a road blockage. A few attempted to argue or negotiate, but I simply smiled politely and pointed to my property survey that was clearly posted on the booth in a weatherproof display case. "Feel free to call the police if you'd like," I said pleasantly. "I've already discussed this situation with local law enforcement, and they've confirmed I'm within my legal rights to charge access fees for crossing my private property." By mid-afternoon, word had spread rapidly throughout the entire neighborhood, and several residents had begun taking pictures and videos of my toll booth operation to share on social media and neighborhood forums. I knew it was only a matter of time before Maxwell discovered what I had done and came to confront me, probably with threats of legal action and police intervention. Sure enough, around 4 p.m., Patricia discovered my toll booth while returning from her weekly grocery shopping trip. Her shocked and outraged expression as she rolled down her car window was absolutely priceless and made all the hard work worthwhile. "What is the meaning of this unauthorized construction?" she demanded, her face turning bright red with anger and disbelief. "This is completely illegal harassment and extortion. I'm calling Maxwell and the police right now." She refused to pay the $20 toll and parked her expensive sedan on the side of the road, furiously dialing her phone while other residents backed up behind her, honking their horns and growing increasingly impatient. When Maxwell arrived approximately 30 minutes later, his face had turned an alarming shade of crimson with rage that I had never seen before. He stormed up to my toll booth with his expensive shoes kicking up dust, clearly beside himself with anger and disbelief. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted loudly enough to attract a small audience of curious neighbors and passers-by. "This is illegal harassment and extortion. You cannot block a public road with some unauthorized toll booth." I remained completely calm and professional, which seemed to infuriate him even more than if I had shouted back. "This isn't a public road, Mr. Bennett," I replied evenly. "You established that fact yourself when you installed your gate and began charging access fees. According to my property survey, This portion of the road crosses my land, and I'm simply exercising the same property rights you claimed for the HOA. Maxwell threatened to call the police immediately, his voice rising to nearly a shout as more neighbors gathered to watch the confrontation. I calmly invited him to contact law enforcement, explaining that I was standing entirely on my own property with certified survey documents proving my legal right to be there. I've already consulted with my attorney about this situation, I added with satisfaction. Everything you see here is perfectly legal and properly documented. If you have concerns about the property line or my rights, you're welcome to commission your own professional survey. Maxwell pulled out his expensive phone and dramatically called the police, pacing back and forth while describing what he characterized as illegal road blockage and an unauthorized toll booth to the dispatcher. Within 20 minutes, Officer Ramirez arrived on scene, a middle-aged police officer with a professional, no-nonsense demeanor whom I had met previously when reporting a trespassing incident on my ranch. Officer Ramirez listened carefully to both sides of the dispute and thoroughly reviewed all my documentation, including my property survey, easement papers, and construction permits. After conducting a thorough examination of the evidence and the physical situation, he turned to Maxwell with a definitive conclusion. "Sir, this appears to be a civil property dispute, not a criminal matter," he said professionally. "Mr. Morgan is operating entirely on his own property according to these official surveys and legal documents. If you dispute the property line or his legal rights, that's something you'll need to address through civil court rather than criminal law enforcement." Maxwell sputtered indignantly, insisting that I must be breaking some law, any law that would allow the police to shut down my operation immediately. Officer Ramirez remained professional but firm in his assessment. "Unless you have official documentation showing this land belongs to your HOA, there's nothing for me to enforce here. I strongly suggest you consult with your attorney about resolving this through proper legal channels." As Officer Ramirez drove away, Maxwell stood there red-faced, humiliated, and completely helpless to stop my legal toll booth operation. But I knew this confrontation was just the opening battle in what would become a much larger war, and Maxwell Bennett wasn't the type of person who would surrender easily or gracefully accept defeat.